Good morning, everybody. I'd like to continue looking at biblical poetry, and we have looked at many things regarding the Bible's poetry. So the three types of parallelisms are the three main things: synonymous, antithetical, and synthetic. And so we looked at various poetic structures like the envelope structure, the chiastic structure, word or sound play, acrostics, and even various forms of parallelisms within the Psalms itself. Like the Psalm has two themes that play as poetry as well when we fold the Psalm in half. So, like we did Psalm 19, 23, and 95 all do that sort of thing, where it has a comparative theme or a contrastive theme. So, remember, about 33% of the Bible is poetry. And, I mentioned, for instance, the book of Job and Isaiah are both 90% poetry. And a lot of times we don't think of that, but it's helpful for us to be able to read the poetry as poetry because we'll get more out of it. So Proverbs, Psalms, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, they're all books of poetry, whether prophetic or just verse on various topics. So poetry ought to be read as such, so here we are. I've mentioned that when we read the Bible's poetry, it should cause us to slow down with it, to engage with it, to listen to its message, and watch what it is doing. So the Bible's parallelistic thought in pairs, thought rhyming, if you will, is rather striking and profound in the way it's presented in the Bible. And so, to the scriptures we shall go. I have various passages to go over today. So I want to look at Psalm 119, which is the king acrostic or alphabetical psalm in the Bible. In fact, it is the longest chapter in the entire Bible. So each verse of Psalm 119 is parallelism in form, done in couplets. So I want to start with the most famous Psalm 119 verse. Any guesses? It's in the front of a lot of Bibles.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet.
Verse 105. That's right. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. So Psalm 119's verse 105. I'm just going to give a few examples. There's 176 verses in Psalm 119. And in a way, it's all poetic in the sense that they're all similarly saying how great is the Torah, how great is God's law and his commandments and his statutes and judgments and testimonies and everything. So, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. I would say that's synonymous parallelism. It's kind of like it's saying the same thing twice. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Now, in the Hebrew, it's almost chiastic in structure because thy word is the center that both share. So it's a lamp unto my feet, preceding it, thy word, and a light unto my path, following it. And so in that sense, it does a 1, 2, 3, like a chiastic structure. In probably the most simplest form you can have of just one center and two parts. So again, a lamp unto my feet is thy word, and it's like it's sharing it. Thy word is a lamp or a light unto my path. Make sense?
Yes.
So Psalm 119 verse 1, if we go back to verse 1, blessed are the undefiled in the way, who walk in the law of the Lord. Okay, I would say this is synthetic parallelism now. Synthetic parallelism acts as parallelism. It should be read as a couplet or parallelism, but it's simply completing or expounding on its first line. So it looks like it's just a complete thought. So blessed are the undefiled in the way. It doesn't say the same thing twice, or it doesn't say an opposing thing, but rather who walk in the law of the Lord. So it completes it Therefore, that is synthetic parallelism.
Question, do you,
Mhm.
I can look it up, but do you know, is way there the word derech?
I believe so.
Because,
Ashrei.
you know, derech, like, you know, the way is a place where you walk, you know, so it's,
Right.
yeah.
That, right, right.
Aren't walk, the holech
Oh.
and derech, is it the same?
What's that?
Are derech and holech related at all? I mean, no, it's just the one shared
They
word.
just sound similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting that they sound.
Yeah, it is.
Derech, holech.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Derek and Holech. I'm currently on my 4th revision of doing a translation of Psalm 119 that uses the Hebrew word order 90% of the time as a center of focus and meditation. And so I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but sometime. So several verses in Psalm 119 uses this structure in the sense of they do this, but I do this. We'll see this several times throughout. For example, verse 110 of Psalm 119 says, "The wicked have laid a snare for me, yet I erred not from thy precepts." It's just like kind of randomly, like out of the ordinary, they do this wicked thing, but I want to learn your statutes. The psalmist, King David, most likely is the candidate, is always wanting to know the statutes, the chukim, the ones that aren't given the explanation in scripture. So he always kind of, it's like he's sneaking that in there. By the way, I would like to know your chukim, the statutes. Go to verse 142, Psalm 119, 142. It says, "Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is truth." Would you guys say that's synonymous, saying the same thing twice, or synthetical, saying like a completing of the first verse? Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law, thy Torah, is truth.
Sounds like it's completing.
Completing, I would agree. You could make the argument for both, but a lot of people, something that I've mentioned before is that synonymous parallelism, saying the same thing twice or similarly, some would argue that each time it actually is just expounding or furthering the thought. So yeah, you usually can't go wrong with saying that it's synthetic. But yeah, I can see the argument for both. So those are just some examples, some of everything, antithetical, synonymous, and synthetic in Psalm 119. Any observations, questions on Psalm 119? It would take, I was doing a class on Psalm 119, it'd take the whole year, hey, to do like a, to go through each chunk of 8 letters, 22 sections of 8 letters it would take a whole year pretty much for us to go through a class every week. So let's look at Psalm 136. If you're familiar with it, I'm not going to go through a bunch of the verses. I just want you to make an observation. In Psalm 136, looking at the Bible's poetry, I just want you to notice something interesting. Anybody? Psalm 136.
The repetition of, for his mercy endureth forever.
That's right. That's right. It's the only psalm that I can think of where they have this repetition, like Daniel mentioned, in Hebrew, ki leolam chasto, for his mercy endureth forever, or for his devotion is eternal. And from a poetic perspective, the psalm seems to compare every verse to its repeating response. They're all under the category of this. Why? Because his mercy endures forever. So it puts the psalm in a position of synonymous poetry, synonymous, not parallelism, because it's not all done in couplets, rather the whole, how many verses is it?
26.
26, all 26 verses kind of go with the repeating chorus. it's one repeating chorus there. And this is the only psalm that does that, so it's unique among the psalms. And I would say it's some form of poetic structure that keeps with it. And in a way, more contemporary worship songs today, not 26 times typically, but verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. You know, here it's verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus. You know, it keeps going on and on. And more of a call and response thing. It seems like it's more of a call and response. So yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, this is normally read at Passover.
Yeah.
Passover time. When we were in Israel in 1981, in our Hebrew class, it was right before Passover. They had all the class, like, you know, the class, they had different levels of class, you know, beginning, intermediate, advanced.
Oh, right.
And they had, right before Passover, they had everybody get together, and they had like matzah and boiled eggs and some snacks. But they had these two elderly Jewish men read this in Hebrew. And one of them would read the first part of the verse, and the other one was go, Kele olam chasto, Kele olam chasto.
Just go right through it.
It was really neat to, you know, just to hear it read, you know, with one man reading the first part of each verse and the other man reading the
Yeah, like as a response.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally set up to be able to do
that's
that.
probably
so.
why, you know, it's probably what it was written to do. Do it
Yeah,
that way.
it seems like it. It's easy enough because
Responsive reading.
I could be in a crowd, and if one person has the Bible, they could read the verse, and everyone else will know the chorus because His mercy endureth forever. You know, for His mercy endureth forever. Okay, I want to keep going to. Oh, yeah, Lawrence.
Good question. Would this be the location for where the church got the responsive readings from? Is this kind of the
Very-
Possibly.
Very possible.
Okay, just weird. how
Yeah, because some
it's
churches do
the
that. A lot,
same.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah, could be. And this is certainly one of the most ancient versions of it that we know of. So yeah. Okay, I want to go to Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. So I have a few samples of various things to read regarding the Bible's poetry. And I want to go to Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. So chapter 3, 1 through 8. So notice, while I read this, notice within each verse whether it be synonymous, meaning similar, saying the similar thing twice, or if it's antithetical, saying something that's the opposite of something. So Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace.
Sounds like a song I've heard before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say? Is this saying the similar thing twice? Is it saying opposites? Is it completing the form by the first, expounding on expounding the second time from the first verse? What would you say? What's your observation?
Well, the first verse is parallel. It's just saying the same thing twice.
Mhm.
To everything a season, time to every purpose. So it's basically just repetition, repeating, saying the same thing twice. Then I think there's a lot of both. I mean, there obviously are contrasts, the antithetical.
But it's all the same basic message.
Yeah, it's repeating the cycle. And of course I'm familiar with this, but I never thought of it before. The picture, a time to be born, a time to die. Well, a time to plant, what happens to your body after you die? You get
Break
planted
down to
in the
dirt.
ground, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
A time to plant, and a time, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. There's the resurrection. So, so even though it's contrast, it's also saying the same thing.
And I think the more you look at it, the more profound it is if you're expecting it to be poetry in this sense. Because like you just gave the example, Daniel, what verse was it? A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up. It's like those, and it's each verse in itself is antithetical, right? A time to heal, kill, a time to heal, break down, build up. But then a lot of these verses are synonymous in the sense that it's like, what does it say? A time to kill, a time to heal, and then a time to break down, which is synonymous with kill, and a time to heal, which is synonymous with build up.
Yeah.
And so it's very profound when you read it as poetry, because it's going to be like, whoa, that is nuts. Like, look at that. And so in itself, it's packed with synonymous and, the antithetical as well. Antithetical in each verse, but then synonymous by, antithetical in each verse, but then verse to verse, it's synonymous, comparative thought rhyme. So even just something as simple as that, as we find every time, like when we look at the Psalms and we're comparing like, oh, the heavens declare the glory of God. How great is the law of the Lord. Like, oh, those things rhyme in Psalm 19. Two things that God has revealed through and glorified. And so, Psalm 95, like, worship the Lord, come, worship and bow down. And then, oh, those who were gone out into exile and disobeyed. It's like, why are we talking about two opposite things? That's because the psalm itself is parallelism. You fold it in half, and it does more than just what you think verse by verse. Okay, Song of Psalms, Song of Solomon. Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, is a love poem. And it's drenched in metaphor. This is that is this. And allegorical even, like, people throughout history have looked at this as on the Jewish side of things, God and Israel, and the Christian attest the Christ and the church sort of thing. So there's vivid imagery, and we'll look at Song of Solomon, chapter 4. And both Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon are both attributed to Solomon. And Ecclesiastes, at least a Solomon-type persona, wisdom figure persona like that. So love is intense and it's beautiful, and like fire, it can be abused and even dangerous. And so let's check out, I just wanted to read chapter 4, the first 4 verses, and I'm reading in the King James Version. So it says, this is the maiden's beauty. Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes within thy locks. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Mount Gilead. Thy teeth are like a flock of sheep that are even shorn, which come up from the washing, whereof every one bear twins, and none is barren among them. That's so detailed, like just to talk about a woman's teeth. It's like, not only are they these beautiful sheep on the hill, shorn sheep, like they're not just big fluffy, they're well kept, they're fruitful, they're bearing twins, none of them barren. It's like, wow, okay, calm down. Verse 3, thy lips are like a thread of scarlet, and thy speech is comely. Thy temples are like a piece of a pomegranate within thy locks. Thy neck is like the Tower of David, builded for an armory. He must have a reputation. David has a reputation of his armory, whereon there hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. So you can see like the detail that it he either gets, like with the teeth, he just keeps getting deeper and deeper. But some of them is just kind of a, your temples are like a piece of pomegranate within thy locks. Very vivid imagery, bright colors, if this were a painting. And so yeah, Song of Solomon is full of this. And like I said, it's very metaphoric, comparing things to be like they're as this, and then also allegorical as well, historically, both on Jewish and Christian side of things. So any comments or observations?
I think that in a 21st century American culture, we express compliments a little differently.
Oh yeah. We always kind of joke about, oh my gosh, look at this,
I know earlier.
Your neck is like a tower.
He, where does he say it?
Those are some real good ones in
He
here.
says, I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. I mean,
did you just call me a
can you
horse?
imagine Americans saying, you remind me of a horse. Your nostrils flare and your.
For Americans, it'd be more like comparing her to a sports car.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Which most women I don't think would be too thrilled with.
Right, yeah.
It's like we're thinking more visually.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the Bible's expressing like, you're strong like this, which is an ox or a horse. Like, where in our culture, like, you're saying I look like a cow? Like, no, that's not what I mean. I mean the strength of an ox,
Yeah, like those four verses you read, somebody actually did a painting of that. Where if you took this literally, this is what she would look like. And it was bizarre.
Yeah. Be a fruity, agricultural looking lady.
Yeah. You had a couple of doves up here.
All the fruit and everything,
Yeah.
all the, yeah.
And the neck was real tall.
Sheep teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something else. It's very different from our culture today, for sure, complimentary wise. Yeah. Okay, as we go into the prophets, we find that the Lord oftentimes relays his message through poetry, that he's often speaking through poetry. And so I came across this quote from Brian Zond, who had an article called The Poetic and the Prophetic. And I just had to cut and paste this. He says, the Old Testament prophets were all poets to one degree or another, and nearly all Hebrew prophecy is poetic in nature. Prose is the vehicle for inert information, just the regular stories and history that's given out. But poetry is the magic carpet of prophetic imagination. Prose is the precise tool for telling what is. Poetry is the mystical means of imagining what could be. Prose is the small room of fixed reality. Poetry unlocks the door to infinite possibility. So yeah, God speaks to us in poetry, and poetry causes us to read slower. Like if we know how to read the poetry, you can't just zoom through it and read its surface information without getting what it's doing and its comparative and contrastive elements to it, and further expounding, like the book of Job and Isaiah does all throughout. Much more profound poetry in Job and Isaiah. So, you're not always going to get it the first read, and the more you sit with it, the more you'll discover, and the more you'll hear. So, let's flip to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, chapter 9. Jeremiah, chapter 9. One of the big three scrolls, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. So in Jeremiah chapter 9, let's do like the first 3 verses. I was wanting to just get a sample of a lot of different types of poetry that the Bible uses. Jeremiah 9, 1-3, it says, "Oh, that my head were waters, and mine eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people. Oh, that I had hid in the wilderness, a lodging place of wayfaring men, that I might leave my people and go from them, for they be all adulterers, an assembly of treacherous men. And they bend their tongues like their bow for lies, but they are not valiant for the truth upon the earth. For they proceed from evil to evil, and they know not me, saith the Lord. So we're able to follow along with that, kind of, I see what rhymes and what, thought rhyming that is. So yeah, it kind of starts out, and I picked this because Jeremiah, is seen as like the weeping prophet, lamenting over the destruction and all these things. So when he uses the imagery of mine eyes are a fountain of tears that I might weep day and night, my head were waters. It uses this water and tears imagery, and just like the wilderness and the lodging place. Like if you look at each verse, it'll have a comparative, like a similarity to them. And they bend their tongues in verse 3 like their bow for lies. So it compares like their tongue is like a bow and arrow that shoots lies instead of arrows. But they are not valiant for the truth upon the earth, for they proceed from evil. So you have the truth and evil. And like you see at least a key word or a key element or theme that compares or contrasts either way. There is a decent amount of poetry in Jeremiah, but not nearly as much as, I want to say probably more than Ezekiel. Although I think we don't give Ezekiel as much. I found that in Bibles that set apart the poetry from the narrative, like visually, like how it indents it or centers it, or italicizes it, that there's less in Ezekiel, but there's things in Ezekiel, which we'll go over soon, that I think probably is poetry. It's just my view against whoever published another Bible translation. So, but we'll look at some of that. Anyone, any comments on Jeremiah chapter 9? Well, first 3 verses anyway. If not, I want to get to the next book, Lamentations, which is also attributed to Jeremiah. Next book. And I want to look at chapter 3, specifically verses 48 through 54. So Lamentations 3, 48 through 54. I'm going to read that. Mine eye runneth down with rivers of water for the destruction of the daughter of my people. Mine eye trickleth down and ceaseth not. Here again, he's doing the water running down and the eyes crying, so to speak. My eye trickleth down without any intermission. Verse 50, till the Lord took down and behold from heaven. So you have the idea of here, down, looking down, and then also heaven. So we have up and down. Mine eye affecteth mine heart because of all the daughters of my city. Mine enemies chased me sore like a bird without cause. They have cut off my life in the dungeon and cast a stone upon me. Waters flowed over mine head. Then I said, I am cut off. What do you guys notice? What's some observations? A lot of water. Yeah. Heartbreaking. He's being chased. Mine enemies chased me sore like a bird without cause. Which is kind of a weird thing to say. Like, what is that?
You've probably seen birds being chased.
I guess. Something. Yeah. Okay, well that's just a quick sample of Lamentations. The whole book of Lamentations is set in poetic verse. Okay, so if you're familiar with the prophet Ezekiel, you know that there isn't a lot of poetry attributed to him, as in written verse on the page, but there are visions and sign acts, which, when you think about it, are a type of poetry. A vision can reflect reality and therefore can be synonymous or antithetical. And so Ezekiel performs several sign acts, laying on his side. He's eating Ezekiel bread, although not the kind that you buy in the store.
Yeah. That's off his hair.
Chops up hair with a sword.
Shaving his head,
Burns part of it.
some hair to burn, some to chop, to scatter, etc. And it's all symbolic in some way to reflect an upcoming reality or judgment. And so Ezekiel's scroll contains vivid allegories of judgment. And so allegory, again, is where the story, or it can even be an artwork, can portray something deeper than its medium. So it's not just a painting, it's not just a story, typically something political or moral or of religious nature. It's like, sure, it's a story, but it's also about a political or religious message. And just think of Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia or Orwell's Animal Farm. It's like, it's not just about the farm, it's not just about the Narnia, you know. So there are actually many forms of poetry in Ezekiel's scroll when you think about that. When you think about all the things that doing this physical sign act, usually very strange, reflects something that's going to happen. And so when you think about it like that, it's parallelism. And there are actually many forms of poetry in Ezekiel's scroll. So I want to look at something that's not, if you have a Bible that sets apart poetry from narrative, is not setting apart the vision of dry bones in Ezekiel 37. But as an exercise, I want to read it and see what you guys think. So Ezekiel 37, there's a paleontologist that, if you've ever seen the movie Jurassic Park, is based on one of the guys in there named Robert Backer. And he came up with the idea that dinosaurs were not just cold-blooded reptiles that had to sit in the sun, that they were fast and mammals. And so I read that somewhere every time before they did their dig, they would pray with his team, and they'd read Ezekiel 37 before they dug up bones of dinosaurs. He wanted them to have that picture of like, how might these, if these animals would come to life, you know, like what we could learn. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So Ezekiel 37, I just want to read the first 10 verses. Now I actually had to sit with this and, like I said previous week, kind of sit down and paste it and parse it out, show some highlights, show some similarities. And to me, I think it's a little more poetic than we give it. So, actually, I'm going to read it from my notes here. So let's check this out. The hand of the Lord was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord and set me down in the midst of the valley which was full of bones. Verse 2, and caused me to pass by them round about. And behold, there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. And he said unto me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Lord God, thou knowest. Again he said unto me, Prophesy upon these bones, and say unto them, O ye dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Verse 5, Thus saith the Lord God unto these bones, Behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and ye shall live. And I will lay sinews upon you, and will bring up flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and ye shall live, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a shaking, and the bones came together, bone to his bone. And when I beheld, lo, the sinews and the flesh came up upon him, and the skin covered them above, but there was no breath in them. Then said he unto me, Prophesy unto the wind. Listen to all the wind and breath, the ruach. Then said unto me, Prophesy unto the wind. Prophesy, Son of man, and say to the wind, Thus saith the Lord God, Come from the four winds, and even, O breath, and breathe, which is a different word in Hebrew, ufchi, from nafach, to breathe, means to breathe, but it's a poetic word. for breathe, not ruach, ruhi. So, oh breath and breathe upon these slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood up upon their feet as an exceeding great army. So as I parsed this out, I saw many things that could come off as parallelism and in a poetic sense. So you have, like, in verse 1, it says, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord, like the hand of, and he carried me and set me down. They're all synonymous. In the midst of the valley that was full of bones, which is our theme that's going to be through the rest of the text here. It caused me to pass by them round about. There were very many. They were very dry. And so verse 3, Son of man, can these bones live? And it furthers or expounds on it by saying, only the Lord God knows if that will be the case. Verse 4, prophesy upon these bones, O ye dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. And furthering the thought as well. And again in verse 5, thus saith the Lord unto these bones, behold, I will cause breath. So, like, the Lord says, and he causes breath in these bones, and that ye shall live. Of course, bones obviously represent death in this case, and that they shall live. Well, that's ironic. They're bones, right? They're dead. So in verse 6, I will lay sinews upon you. This is like a list of all these different things. I will do this, I will do that. I will lay sinews, bring up flesh, cover you with skin, put breath in you, and as a result, ye shall live. In verse 7, I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a shaking. And then it describes it further as the bones came together, the shaking and the bones come together, bone to his bone. And anyway, through this whole thing, and even the wind thing in verse 9, it's ruach, 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 nafach, ufchi in there. So I had to look that up because I was wondering if they're all ruach words, but they aren't. And again, in biblical poetry, you often have words that are similar like that. Like we have light, illumination, brilliance. You know, we don't usually say, oh, the brilliance of these bulbs, they're so magnanimous. And, you know, like that's using poetic language. And so in here, it does use some of those types of words. And so I prophesied as he commanded me in verse 10, and the breath came into him, furthering that, expounding on that. And they lived and stood up on their feet, a great army. Several of these almost have like couplets or triplets, and then it ends with like a synopsis, an exceeding great army, bone to his bone. What was the other one? The bones, they were very dry, it ends with. The valley full of bones, etc. I just went in reverse order there, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, is that poetic, or is it just prose, like regular writing that we would expect in the Bible? The other, 70-some%. I'm not convinced that it's not poetry, and any Bible translation scholars out there, I would challenge you to re-look at a lot of the things in Ezekiel. As I said, my translation, it distinguishes the poetry from the narrative, and there's not a lot. And I want to say some of the big passages like we think in Ezekiel about the Spirit coming and causing the law to be upon our minds and such. Even in Jeremiah, the New Covenant, Jeremiah 31 through 34. I feel like these are actually very poetic in a sense. Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I think, the term poetry as we use it in English, it's like, sometimes I think the structure of the words might not be extremely poetic, but what would you call it? the fact that it's using symbolic language, you know, that it's,
Right,
I
right.
mean, this is kind of a narrative, you know, he describes what he saw.
Mhm.
And of course, that verse
Sure.
9 about, you know, with the ruach and the wind and the spirit being the same word in Hebrew, you know, that's especially poetic there.
Using it as wind and breath
Yeah,
both.
wind and breath
Mhm.
being the same word. So I think that a lot of Ezekiel's visions and things, it may not be structured linguistically so much poetically, but I would still call it poetic in the sense that it uses symbolic language.
Sure.
The
Right.
symbolic language by itself, I consider to be poetry in some degree.
In some degree, right. Yeah. And like when we're looking at metaphor and similes and allegory and all that, those things can be poetic. Like when we looked at some of the structures of, you know, like a chiasm, the whole book of Esther is a chiasm that all, you know, it's like, you wouldn't say anything is poetic, or Genesis 1 is poetic, but it's very poetically structured in the sense of parallelisms and usage of repeating things a certain amount of times and all that.
You know, like in the early chapters of Ezekiel where he describes the sea and the cherubim, you know, the vision by the river, and it's like in my old Bible I took and color coded every time he used where he's describing what the cherubim looked like. He uses words like as, similar to, like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's because it's like whatever he saw, you can't describe it without, because it's something heavenly, it's not of this realm. So I can't describe what I saw except by comparing it to things that you're familiar with.
His communication had to describe something that the audience would know,
Yeah,
because he's seen stuff that they don't know.
Yeah, it's like if you saw a color that doesn't exist in our world, how would you
Right.
describe that color? Well, you can just, all you can do is compare it to colors that the people are familiar with.
Yeah.
And so when he describes some of his visions, that he has to use all these, because I was amazed how many times I circled and
Sure.
color coded that, like,
Sure.
similar to, in the likeness of.
Same with Revelation too.
Yeah,
Ezekiel
yeah,
and
same.
Revelation are
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
the two big
yeah,
ones.
a lot of those apocalyptic type of visions.
Yeah, where it's like they had a peek into a different realm,
Yeah.
and like,
Yeah.
whoa, how am I going to explain this? Wheels with eyes, you know, like, yeah,
UFO.
yeah, something like that.
Well, it was wide, you can't identify it, so yeah. Yeah.
What was that? I seen like the UFO progression that if you can't identify it, it's unidentified flying object. If you can, now it's just a FO, a flying object.
Yeah.
But if it has been identified and it's just sitting there, now it's just an object. So, an O. Okay, what's our time? What do we got?
10:43.
Okay, good. All right, one more thing. Hosea, chapter 14, 1 through 7. Let's look at the prophet Hosea. I have something really cool that I already started preparing for next week on biblical poetry. But let's look at this, 14, 1 through 7. So let me read it to you. Israel, return unto the Lord thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you words and turn to the Lord. Say unto him, take away all iniquity and receive us graciously. So will we render the calves of our lips. Assure shall not save us. We will not ride upon horses, neither will we say any more. To the work of our hands ye are our gods, for in thee the fatherless findeth mercy. I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely. For mine anger is turned away from him. I will be as the dew unto Israel. He shall grow as the lily, and cast forth his roots as Lebanon. His branches shall spread, and his beauty shall be as the olive tree, and his smell as Lebanon. They that dwell under his shadow shall return, They shall revive as the corn or the wheat, and grow as the vine. The scent thereof shall be as the wine of Lebanon. So we get a few things in here. We get some interesting thought rhyming. There's a word play. We have an interesting word play in verse 2. It says, talk with you words and turn to the Lord. Notice all the talking, the saying, the lips, all this stuff. Say unto him, take away all iniquity and receive us graciously. Now here's the word play. So will we render the calves of our lips. Assure shall not save us. We will not ride upon horses, neither will we say any more. So anyone have a different translation on so we will render the calves of our lips? The word para, cow, the calves, is also the same word. If you guys know the Hebrew bracha, borei pri,
Fruit, yeah.
hagafen, the fruit. So this is interesting because there's a tie-in here of what we say and the sacrifices of the tabernacle. See, if you read it with both, we will render the fruit of our lips, or the bulls or calves of our lips. And so there's this wordplay there, para, para. Also, I noticed at the last part here in verses 4, let's see, backsliding, and then freely, mine anger is turned away from him. And then verse 5, it says, I will be as the dew unto Israel. And as a continuing expounding thought, he shall grow as a lily. So that dew to Israel grows as a lily. And so, cast forth his roots as Lebanon. And as a result, his branches shall spread. See, root, branches, like it's a growing progression used in those two verses that are synonymous together as verses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's also some contrast here, like the
Mhm.
lily is tender and delicate and small compared to when it says Lebanon, it's usually talking about the cedars.
Yeah, the cedars of Lebanon, that was the renowned commodity, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, both are true that, you've got the small, fragile lily that's very beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've also got the strength of this cedar.
Yeah.
Cedars of Lebanon as well.
That whole verse 4 through 7, really almost everything, it has the olive tree,
Yeah.
is the smell of Lebanon. Again, like you said, Daniel, that Lebanon is the cedars. And then the corn and the vine in verse 7. So a lot of synonymous parallelism, saying similar things, expounding on its first verse and yeah. So again, to read like that, to notice those details, you have to sit with it. You have to know what you're expecting there. And I highly recommend having a Bible that does set apart the poetry, because that would be the easiest way to write off. First off, see that this is poetry and it's expecting me to read it as poetry. And so if I could find a page in here where it shows both. I gave some examples in earlier classes. Then that is in my opinion, the best way to identify the poetry. Like I said, it's not always 100% guaranteed. I was just trying to throw some other stuff in there, like in Ezekiel. But for the most part, that 33% of the Bible is going to be set apart in that way. And will be very helpful to know, they should expect me to read poetry, instead of identifying it in English, the poetry words, or the parallelisms, which the parallelisms are easier than you think. It takes a little retraining of the mind to look at it and to get to that place to know how to read it and expect how to treat it. So yeah. Any comments, questions, or concerns? If not, we'll close there and we'll get ready. Yes, sir.
What Bible version do you have?
I'm using a King James Reader's Edition. Actually, a new edition that just came out. You know, the King James is a very old. I'm doing a deep dive into the King James version this year, and looking at it, actually this Bible, the way it promotes itself, says that the Reader's edition of the Bible solves a 400-year-old dilemma by applying the most poetic setting and visual system to the world's most poetic biblical language, the text of the King James Bible. And so even in the narrative of the Bible, we do find rhythm and the syntax, the way everything's spelled out, that we see poetic forms and structure even in the Bible's narrative, in the structures and such. And so the King James does that the best because it has an antique flavor to it already, and oftentimes uses, as we looked at some of the earlier poetry in Genesis, the same Hebrew word order. So it feels older, and in fact, when it was published in 1611, had an antique lens or flavor to it then. So anyway, studying poetry, I highly recommend reading the Bible's poetry in King James, but it's going to be hard to find King James Bibles that does set apart the poetry. And so there's a few editions, the Reader's edition, there's a few other ones. I think Schuyler Publisher puts out one called the Traveris. It's a single column that sets apart the poetry. There's not a lot. It's kind of a new trend lately that, we want the King James and single column and setting apart the poetry. So yeah. Daniel?
Yeah, I think you pointed this out before, but it's always good to kind of clarify, like, when we talk about poetry in English, people a lot of times they think of it as
Rhyme and
just as
free verse.
It's not inspired. It's like when we say the Bible is written in poetic fashion, we need to make sure people understand, but it's Holy Spirit inspired poetry.
Yeah.
It's inspired by the Holy Spirit, and it's authoritative.
Right.
Because like when when Jesus quoted from any place in the Old Testament, it's obvious it's still authoritative. Just because it's written in a poetic style doesn't mean it's less authoritative, that still carries the...
That's why we're so interested in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Is because why would God speak in poetry so much? Yeah. And why would he expect us to read it as narrative?
He's a poet of poets, just like he's the King of Kings,
yeah.
Lord of Lords, he's a poet of poets.
You'll see a lot of times in Genesis, Samuel especially, whenever dialogue comes from a character, it's poetic. Here's Hannah. And she speaks in she prays in poetry, and it's like it's all like in the prophets, God is speaking through poetry. He wants this vivid imagery. And like I said, you won't get as much out of it as if we just demonstrated a few passages here if you don't know how to read it as poetry. The Bible assumes you have that basic understanding. So anyway, that's why we're on like our 8th class here on biblical poetry. So yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, if you've seen the Ten Commandments movie.
Oh yeah,
the old Ten Commandments
a few times.
movie. I don't know if you remember when Moses is talking to Zipporah before they're married, and she's talking about how I can't remember the word. I mean, it's kind of corny, but she's talking about that we're not like the Egyptian women whose hands are clean and soft. We are the shepherds that our hands are. I mean, it's kind of comical and corny, but it is that style. It's done in that style, that comparative style that the women of Egypt are like this, but we are like this.
We're like this. Yes.
Well, similar also, like when Jesus was talking to people, how he would often use stories and parables. It wasn't just standing up there preaching. It was so, I don't know, maybe he needed to do that to draw the people to listen.
Well, at a time, Teresa, that we've kind of lost these days, we think of poetry as like, someone wrote a book of poetry, but when people used to speak and they wanted it to be something that people would remember and that it was important, they, just like I was talking about, like differentiating the poetry and narrative in a Bible visually, the setting, how it's portrayed, that they would do that in their dialect and how they spoke. And like, if they were gonna say something in public, it was more special than just a...
Right.
prose like, you know, how we typically are normal speaking. It was meant to be more forceful and remembered, and we've kind of lost that today. Yeah, we don't
Well, and
expect it.
it helps people remember, like,
Yeah, yeah.
have it to be able to bring it, out in a conversation. If
Sure.
someone's talking about, like if you remember some little kid book that, has rhymes in it, and someone's talking about little kid books, and, you know, you always would remember.
Nursery rhymes, Dr.
Yeah.
Seuss.
Yeah,
Yeah. Fox and Socks.
yeah.
Like you remember
Well,
that more.
When our older two were little, I read this one Mother
Richard
Goose,
Scarry's.
Richard Scarry, like Mother
Okay,
Goose.
yeah.
I read the whole thing over and over so many times. Ben was 2, and he had almost the whole book memorized.
Wow.
And I would sit Shoshana by him, and he would read it to her.
But he wasn't really reading, he was reciting.
He was reciting it. Wow,
Really,
that's
yeah,
great.
From the pictures, yeah.
Yeah. He just knew it from the pictures. huh?
So it's kind of like with the poetry in the Bible, it's,
And kids love to hear that because it's
Yeah.
different than just ordinary everyday talk.
Right.
It's like, whoa, what is this? Da, 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 da. And it's like, that's neat, you know, like music can be the same
Yeah.
way. Just, you know. All right, well, we'll go ahead and close there. What I'm hoping to do is, and it's going to take a little extra research, we're going to look at the poetry of Yeshua and Paul. There's several things that I would identify as poetry in Paul's letters, just letters that he wrote to different congregations. And I presented something that this author who did a translation of the Gospels and Revelation in poetry, that he believes that Yeshua is the lost poet, that no one realizes. Almost everything he said was poetry. Oh my goodness. The structure of the Sermon on the Mount in triads and stuff is ridiculous. And even its center point, the Our Father prayer, is in, yeah. So tons of poetic structure and poetic, whatever you want to call it, usages of poetic devices in his teachings. So we'll go ahead and close there, and Lord willing, we'll get into that next week.